good day. It is Clarissa here. You are in the Limelight, and we are going live today because I've got some great news. I've got a good friend of mine who is not only one of the greatest writers on the planet, but he's an award-winning ghost, and among many other things we'll be talking about. But he's got a book dropping today, and I wanted to come on live about it because it's an extraordinary book about an extraordinary heroine of our time and of our history here in the United States. So, Gary, without further ado, you are there. I was going to take you off and bring you on, but you've been here since the beginning. Congratulations to you, because how exciting that you are dropping your book today. Let's get rid of all this stuff. How exciting that you're dropping your book today, and I'm going to tell everybody the name. Hold on one second while I throw the ticker on. I want anybody to see if they can guess exactly about when we talk about the Little Miss of Darke County. I wonder who she could be. Hey, everybody, welcome. We've got Gary Krebs on. He is dropping. He's my agent. He's been helping me with my project. We'll be talking about at a later date. But today his book is dropping, and you can get it at Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble. But who could Little Miss of Darke County be? Gary, you want to tell us?
Well, I could give some clues, but I think I'll just give it away. She's America's most famous sharpshooter, Annie Oakley. But this book focuses just on her origin story. I liken it to, the superhero stories that you see in movies today, except that this is a real American hero. And her story is unbelievable, and people don't know about it. They don't know what she went through before she became famous.
Right. So there she is, a picture of Annie Oakley. I know that we've all heard of her. We may not know as much of her story and her background as you do, and I'd love for you to expand upon that a little bit. But we know her as, like you said, the sharpshooter, and she was only 5 foot tall. I mean, she used to go around. You'll be talking to us, and she used to go around to the shows with Buffalo Bill, because she was the Kim Kardashian of her day. Can we say she was that famous? I mean, first of all, her sharpshooting was extraordinary. Her talent was off the charts. But she was extremely famous throughout the United States, and then became even more so abroad. You'll tell us a little bit more about that. But she did not have. Let me put up another picture of her so people may remember her from that picture. She really had a pretty difficult childhood, and not many people know the story. They know, again, Annie Oakley, sharpshooter, don't know the difficulties and the things that she had overcome. Tell us a little bit about that.
So she was born in Darke County, Ohio, and her family was very poor. They had a farmhouse, but her father was a very good farmer, and he held the family together. They were all Quakers, but he died tragically. And so my story pretty much starts with the trials and tribulations the family went through after his death. It sent them into a tailspin. Annie who was then known as Phoebe Ann Moses, that was her real name.
Right.
She ended up moving from place to place as something of an orphan, even though she had a family with a lot of siblings. She went to a place.
She was the sixth in line. She was the sixth child, Gary.
Yes. So
that's a lot of kids. Back in the day, to feed those amount of mouths, that was a lot of kids.
Her mother tried to make ends meet desperately through sewing and knitting, but it wasn't enough. And interestingly enough, at a very young age, Phoebe tried hunting against her father's wishes and against her mother's wishes. And she became quite a great hunter very young. But as soon as she got her footing and was actually making money from selling her kills, she got moved around and ended up at a place called the infirmary, where she was taunted and abused by other kids. So she took her very next opportunity to go with this couple called the Wolves. They needed help raising their young infant. And it turned out that in this remote log cabin in the woods, this couple held her prisoner for 2 years. They abused her terribly. And if you think about it by today's standards, I mean, there was absolutely nothing there for her except this family and the cabin and the woods. And of course, she wasn't allowed to do what
Right.
she truly loves, which is hunt and shoot a gun.
Right.
So the story really takes us through her ordeal and how she
Right.
escapes and moves on from there.
So where she was put out overnight without shoes in the snow and the freezing cold as a punishment by the woman of the house for doing some silly little whatever it was, as it could warrant such a punishment. Take a deeper dive into that story for us.
So yeah, I mean, so my book, obviously it's historic fiction, but it's based on real events that happened. And later in life, Annie Oakley actually described the physical abuse she sustained from this woman. And no, people don't know, the public doesn't know what their names really were, except that I did call the Garst Museum in Greenville, Ohio, and the curator said she knew their names but couldn't reveal it because their descendants were alive and they preferred to keep anonymity because
Right.
these ancestors had abused an American icon. But so I named them Mr. and Mrs. Wolf. And Mrs. Wolf was just a terrible, terrible woman and treated Phoebe as something of a slave. So she worked young girl to the bone, and Phoebe was darning and knitting, and she fell asleep in a chair by the fire. And Mrs. Wolf wakes her up and beats her near to death and throws her out barefoot into the snow. And it's just
because let's remember, she was not a big woman. Let's remember that, Gary. She was treated as oh, you know, I mean, you say, well, why didn't she defend herself? Well, maybe this had been, you know, a large girl, remember, who was background, which means I'm assured that you listen to it, think of raising a hand. And probably had thinking it was a good thing she didn't have a gun in her hand at the time.
Well, that was the thing. She didn't have access to a weapon until much later in the story. And so, no, she couldn't defend herself. She was young and she was little. And Mrs. Wolf was a large woman. And Mr. Wolf was obviously a much bigger man. So she really had no way to defend herself. And also, you mentioned the Quaker uprising. Quakers were pacifists. So, you know, she obviously would have defended herself if she could, but she wasn't an aggressive person by nature. In fact, throughout her entire life, at least what we know, I don't think she ever fired a gun at a specific person in real life. Although in my story, I embellish a little bit. But, you know, she won so many contests in her lifetime. And then after she became famous, taught thousands and thousands of other girls how to shoot, which is pretty remarkable.
Right. Wow. So about we know, we've heard about, certainly not, you know, illustrated, but what was it that truly drew you to Annie to dig deeper and tell the true story?
So for me, it was just one of those passing little things. It was a paragraph that was floating in my social media feed, and it had this little note that said that you know, Annie Oakley was abused as a child, and it threw me for a loop because I'd never read this before, never heard anything about it. So I really had to dig into it and went through a number of different sources. A lot of them had conflicting information about it. In fact, Annie Oakley herself had something called an autobiography, which it wasn't. It was actually a collection of haphazard interviews she did at the end of her life that is stapled together. But even there, she tells the story of her abuse, but the facts are all mixed up, and the dates and, you know, what happened when is all mixed up. So I reconstructed the events as best as possible. But to me, what really intrigued me was the notion that you have this icon who was the best at what she did. I mean, she was the superhero of her day, and people don't know all of the abuse that she went through, because very shortly after she underwent all these trials and tribulations, she was one of the most famous people in the world. She was she met with royalty. She won all of these major shooting contests, and apparent to everyone's knowledge, she actually never missed a shot, which is, if you think about that, that's
and
just
not only, but
unbelievable.
as a woman back in the day, now we're talking the turn of the century, yeah?
She started out very young, but yeah, we're talking end of 19th century and into early 20th century.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is, women back in the day really had no opportunities to make a good amount of money, and she was quite philanthropic with it, as I understand.
That's actually pretty true, and especially she was philanthropic with her time, teaching other women how to shoot. In fact, there's a great story recounted in the novel about how she met her future husband, Frank Butler. So the two of them ended up pitted against each other in a contest. Frank was already pretty established as a sharpshooter and was part of a traveling team that performed and did trick shots. And the two of them matched each other shot for shot. But Frank missed the last one, and Annie ended up beating him, and he was smitten, and they fell in love and were married, and it's a great love story. He ended up managing her after that.
So after which she started to work with, I want to say Buffalo Bill. She was going around to the different, because Buffalo Bill was itinerant. He would take his show on the road, mostly, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong. Mostly in the Southwest, but I think it was really more in the Northeast.
Yeah, they traveled quite a bit.
Yeah,
they traveled quite a bit, and Annie wowed audiences. She not only could do these amazing trick shots, like, shoot people while looking backwards through a mirror at her object. She could cards clean in half. She could certainly shoot birds in the air and all those kinds of wonderful things. But she was also a genuine performer. So she would skip out onto stage, and she had a bubbly personality, and she really entertained audiences. Like she often would tease the audiences a little bit about her skill, and then do things that the average person could never dream of doing. A true show woman. She really was. I mean, at the time, at the height of her career, there were no movies, there was no TV, there was no internet, there was no radio. You did on a Friday
and Saturday night. You went to, Buffalo Bill was a big deal back in the day. His show, I forget exactly what the name of the show was, but it was obviously itinerant, and they were moving around. Huh?
It was Buffalo Bill's Wild West.
Right. And they were, she was constantly, there were years she was all the time. And, that's just the way, that was the nature of the beast at the time. So what an extraordinary woman. What an extraordinary book. Let's remind everybody again that we're speaking to Gary Krebs. He is not only...
I have a print copy right here.
There it is. There it is, everybody. Hop on over to Amazon, Little Miss of Darke County. You can see it there on the bottom. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Barnes & Noble as well. Gary, talk about what might be happening around the book, or should we just leave it at the book right now? Because I know all the secrets.
We can talk about the state of book publishing in general, if you like.
Okay.
Audience in that, because that's what's going on in the world. That might be on a lot of people's minds.
All right. Love that.
So yeah, a lot of publishing companies are obviously the editors and salespeople and marketing people, everybody working in publishing houses, they're all at home, just like everybody else is. Some companies have laid off people. They've already scaled back.
Some publishers.
Yeah. And Amazon has made an announcement that they have deprioritized books. What that means is a little confusing, and it varies from publisher to publisher.
Right.
So far, Fortunately, my book publishes today, and it's listed as in stock, and people have already received copies of it.
Wonderful.
If out, if Amazon doesn't work, it lists the book as out of stock, or if you can't get it, you can always order the ebook. That's always available.
Right.
Or you could go to barnesnoble.com and order it there.
And where do they get the ebook? Where do we?
Oh, the ebook's in the Kindle store on Amazon.
Okay, awesome,
And
wonderful.
So as an agent, I've been shopping around various projects, and I've been getting responses from some editors. They're reading proposals. It's definitely more silent than it usually is, and the response is even slower. And it's hard to know if publishers are just kind of in this quandary now about what will happen when the quarantine ends, what will happen to publishing. Will brick and mortar bookstores come back and return to business? What books will be of interest when it's all said and done? So, but I have made some deals during.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I have been able to make some publishing deals during this time period, which is a little surprising, but very pleasant.
Well, I'm always going to want to read no matter what or when, and what better time than now to be reading. I think it's one of the things that people have really started to pick back up on, spending the amount, really watch so much Netflix, right? I've seen a lot of people and a lot of social, people are picking up their books again, and they're really, read another time, or finding some new authors that they're really glad that they've found in these challenging times. But I don't think reading is ever going to go by the wayside, and I really would like to think, sure, along with many of us, right, that the bookstore will never close its doors forever. So with that having been said, Gary, I would like to thank you for being on the show. I am so excited. I want to congratulate you again, because the book, researching the book and getting it published is, I know how many, it's been a couple of years now, if I remember correctly, you've been working on this project.
Well, total, that's like now 5 from when I began.
5 years, exactly. A
long haul.
It's years and a long haul, and today it's a major milestone for you to be able to start talking about your book, and it's actually out there and for sale, and it's an amazing story. A woman that lived some 100 years ago. Can we?
Yeah. Yeah. I would.
Go with.
She lived into like the 1920s. So yeah, her heyday was early.
And I'm just going to put. I think become a phenomenal movie. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
I think
it's funny they say that. I do have a movie deal, and I signed an agreement just before all of the pandemic happened.
I didn't know if you wanted to go there. I didn't know if you wanted to say it or if you could say it, but extraordinarily exciting as that. Not only is it a book, but it's going to become a movie, Gary. I couldn't be more thrilled for you, and I'm sure those that are following and watching will think the same thing. Much continued success, sir. Anybody that wants to know more about Gary can find out, or work with Gary or collaborate with him, can find him at gmkwritingandediting.com. His name is Gary Krebs. What's the M stand for?
Well, if you know, if you're Jewish and you know certain Yiddish words. No, it's not.
Michael. What is it? It's Michael. My friend, I send you lots of love and light from far away. You're up in Phoenix, Arizona, and I send you my applause and grand congratulations.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye, Gary. Thanks for coming on.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.